This country's incarcerated juveniles are under constant threat of sexual abuse, not just from their fellow inmates, but more than likely from the authority figures whose very job it is to supervise and protect them. Serena Passion, a survivor of these human rights violations, once said, "We are supposedly in these youth facilities to help rehabilitate us so we can be law-abiding adults. I experienced the most damaging and emotionally devastating treatment of my life thus far when I was in a youth correctional facility." Now, that quote is taken directly from a fact sheet from Just Detention International, an organization focusing on this very issue, which I bring up to mention their prescient tagline, "Rape is not a part of the penalty." Sexual assault in prisons is an omnipresent issue, but it wasn't until 2003 that federal law saw fit to address it with the Prison Rape Elimination Act. This was the first act our country set forth to deter the rape of incarcerated individuals, but it has been thoroughly criticized for not doing enough in the years since. You can do a quick Google search for mistreatment in juvenile treatment facilities and be met with copious examples of negligent and malicious actions taken by the administrators of these institutions and the systems meant to punish their mistakes. According to the Annie E. Casey Foundation's 2015 report on the maltreatment of youth in U.S. juvenile corrections facilities, 1 in 10 youth in state juvenile correction facilities report being victimized sexually. This is completely unacceptable, but it seems that people within and outside these systems would disagree. Lawmakers must push for direct improvements in preventing, detecting, and responding to these issues. An abstract but simple solution to this problem is decreasing the number of juveniles in containment by exploring different pathways towards rehabilitation/detention. The nonprofit group Interrogating Justice outlined, ultimately, the only certain way to reduce the abuse of incarcerated juveniles is to reduce the number of young people behind bars. Once inside the system, research makes it clear that incarcerated youth are vulnerable to physical, sexual, and psychological trauma. End quote. It's simple. Fewer children in these environments means fewer chances for victimization, and this speaks to a broader problem in criminal justice, the rampant overpopulation of prisons. But that's a topic for another day. Now, the step below reducing the amount of incarcerated juveniles is decreasing the amount of juveniles held in adult prisons. There's been a steady decline in recent years, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, with the number going from 9,010 in 2002 to 2,250 in 2021. But this number is still high. These minors, on top of having harsher sentences, are far less likely to receive the services they require and more likely to come to harm. The Juvenile Law Center, speaking on juveniles in adult prisons, said, "These abusive practices cause physical injuries, emotional trauma, and psychological harm, and interrupt healthy development. Youth in prison also face physical and sexual violence, compounding the trauma imposed by their isolation and separation from their friends, families, and communities." End quote. Other less fundamental examples of improvements are laid out in the Office of Justice Programs, standards for the prevention, detection, response, and monitoring of sexual abuse in juvenile facilities. They describe precautions such as increasing direct supervision, decreasing cross-gender body searches, upgrading surveillance technology, and working with outside entities to keep the staff in check, as well as strongly recommending the increase of training and education provided for said staff to prevent these occurrences. Now, before we as a country can start to resolve these issues with direct action, it's important that we attempt to shed light on the stigma surrounding criminal inmates and how it adds to the complacent indifference towards their suffering. Many people are apathetic to the plight of prisoners and their rampant sexual victimization. From jokes aimed at these victims to people expressing indirect support for these crimes, it's easy to feel these issues don't matter because they're just criminals or they deserve it. But it's important to remember that these are people, and they shouldn't be generalized. In conclusion, legislators need to work to uphold precedent laws, as well as create new ones that bring us closer to the cause of protecting youth in the system. Subtle improvements to already existing aspects of our prison system could provide a boon for those affected. And finally, we as people need to make an effort to empathize with our prisoner population. The outcome of this can only be a positive force towards those entrenched in this process.